Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 and 2 discussion. That's right, today we've got that really unusual type of video that actually applies to both games. That's because we're talking about using a system that was added to Path of Exile 1 quite recently in patch 3.25, and that was a test case for the same system being included in early access in Path of Exile 2. This is a guide to using the currency exchange efficiently in order to make yourself currency in-game. It's important to note that this sort of currency flipping has absolutely nothing to do with any of those gold seller websites that might advertise against Path of Exile videos. I can't really stop them doing it, unfortunately. That is considered bannable cheating by grinding your games to buy currency from them, so don't patronize them. All of that out of the way, let's talk about what this guide is and what this guide is not. This was originally written up as an article for gaming strategy site Mobalytics. I'll put a link down in the description below. And this is Editing Gog, just jumping in to say that this was written about a month ago at the time that I'm releasing the video. The reason for that is just that it wasn't something that was time critical to get around to doing, and then I ended up going and getting sick. But the key thing here is that some of the prices in this are no longer going to be accurate, and that's going to go double once Path of Exile 2's 0.2.0 expansion happens. But that's fine because all of this is designed to be timeless advice. So you'll find that whilst I'll be talking about certain exchange rates between Chaos Orbs and Divine Orbs and Exalted Orbs and various essences and the like, those will be out of date, but that doesn't matter because the underlying principles of this guide will still apply. As well as that, I'll also link to an article that was written by content creator Locahole, who goes into more of the basics of the currency exchange. I'd like to think of my video and my article as being a 201 and Locahole's as being a 101. So you can think of just having a basic sense of the currency exchange being a bit of a prerequisite for this video. And the other thing I want to mention is that whilst everything in this video does apply to Path of Exile 1 and 2, this is going to focus on Path of Exile 2 where things differ. So in Path of Exile 1, gold costs are a lot different. They're a lot lower and gold income is lower as well. So we're going to be talking about some gold numbers. If you're playing in Path of Exile 1, all of the gold numbers mentioned in this video are going to be wrong, but you'll easily be able to find out what the equivalent would be in Path of Exile 1. One thing I will add though, if you are looking to do this in Path of Exile 1, definitely look into buying scarabs from other players. The reasons for this we'll get into at the end when we talk about selecting commodities for arbitrage trades, but the key thing that you want to know there is that scarabs are something that people pick up in 1s and 2s that do end up being a fair amount of their character's wealth, and they don't cost a huge amount of gold to request from other players. Scarabs in Path of Exile 1 cost 75 gold to request if they're common, 100 if they're uncommon, 125 if they're rare, 250 if they're mythic, and there is one that doesn't quite fit in, the extreme rarity scarab, Horn Scarab of Preservation. That one is going to cost you 350 gold if you want to request it from another player. If you're instead selling one of these items, instead you pay 25 gold per Chaos Orb you request, or 250 gold per Divine Orb you request, and the commodities you're offering don't matter at all. Alright, so let's talk about what this guide is not. Firstly, this is not a guide to what I term trade sniping. This is the more PvP oriented type of trade in my opinion. Trade sniping is where you're looking to take advantage of other players' mistakes in order to make yourself rich. There's a bunch of ways that people do this. I don't want to go into details on this. I do want to point out though that if you use trade strategies that other players deem to be really unethical and potentially even unconscionable, you might find that this closes some doors for you within the Path of Exile 2 community. For example, there are guilds and there are trade discords that maintain blacklists of people that they consider to be scammers. And if your conduct is ruthless or deceptive enough, then even if it doesn't go so far that you personally consider it to be scamming someone, you might find yourself listed on some of these scammer blacklists, which might lock you out of some trust-based opportunities, particularly in Path of Exile 1 at the moment, but also potentially in Path of Exile 2 in the future. So I don't really recommend going for trade sniping strategies if you're able to work out any of them. The first type of strategy I want to talk about is what I term arbitrage. This is flipping. This is where you are buying low and selling high. Now this next section is going to reference the Greater Essence of Torment. At the time I'm recording this video, that's the most valuable of the essences. That could certainly change in the future. But imagine this scenario. You're newly in maps, you're running your 7th map of the league, and you had a really, really lucky drop. You got yourself a Greater Essence of Torment. You picked it up, you scooped your loot, and you're thinking, fantastic, now I can go and buy myself a bunch of upgrades. You have a look at the options that you've got for selling this item. The first option is that you can sell it to a buy order on the currency exchange. We'll get to more details on what exactly a buy order is, what exactly a sell order is in a sec. But someone has put up a buy order, 24 Exalted Orbs. You can hand over your Greater Essence of Torment. They get it instantly. You get your 24 Exalts instantly. Your second option might be to undercut someone who's got the lowest priced Greater Essence of Torment up for sale. So maybe they're asking 31 Exalts. You list yours for 30. And then perhaps a couple of hours later, perhaps a couple of minutes later, perhaps 3 days later, you end up getting your 30 Exalted Orbs. Or you have a third option, which is to save it up until you've got enough of this same essence in order to sell a whole bunch of them for one Divine Orb at a time. Now, I don't think it's irrational in any way to take the instant 24 Exalted Orbs here. That can help be a force multiplier for your clear speed, which can then mean that your next bigger drops end up coming to you quicker than they otherwise would. So it's perfectly reasonable to do this. It's not someone who's making an irrational choice. They're just looking to get their currency quickly and then get back to mapping. In the real world, what arbitrage is buying in one market to resell at higher prices somewhere else. For example, you purchase Magic the Gathering cards at a Japanese language when you're over in Japan, and then when you get home to Norway, or when you get home to the United States, or when you get home to Australia, you then go ahead and sell them where they're pretty rare. That's what it's like in the real world. In Path of Exile, there's only one market, but you can still be an effective intermediary here and make currency for yourself by being someone who is an intermediary between sellers that have only one of an item and a buyer that only is really interested in getting a lot at once. Or you can be an intermediary between sellers who want currency now and a buyer who desires the item tomorrow. These are the two different ways that you can insert yourself as an intermediary into a trade and end up in a situation where you're not really taking advantage of anyone. You're simply providing a service that ends up making you more currency. Essentially, arbitrage trading is just simply buying low and selling high, but on items that you don't expect to have wild price changes. When we get to swing trading in a sec, that's where you do expect there to be wild price changes. So in the example of the Greater Essence of Torment, the service that you're providing is instant liquidity to the person that wants 24 Exalts and has a Greater Essence of Torment, and then you sit on the item until you're able to sell it, maybe for 30 Exalted Orbs, or maybe you decide that it's more appropriate to sell it in Chaos Orbs, which tend to be worth more than Exalts, or in Divine Orbs, which tend to be worth much more than Exalted Orbs. We'll go into arbitrage strategies a bit later, but that's the basics of it. And then we have the option of swing trading. Now, swing trading is also a thing in the real world, but it's quite different inside the game. The basic idea of swing trading is that you sincerely believe you know the future price trajectory of an item. So either you believe it's going to increase in price due to an increase in demand, or a decrease in supply, or alternately, maybe you believe that it's going to fall in price. If you believe it's going to fall in price, usually the best thing to do is to sell your stock and just get out of that market entirely. But if you believe it's going to go up, then this is the time to start doing some swing trading. Now, this can be done with currency items, or it can be done with items that can be equipped. But when you're doing it with equipable items, there's a lot more clunk involved because you can't do it through the currency exchange. A good example here, imagine you're watching a fairly well-known and popular streamer and they express a desire to build around an unpopular skill. At that point, you might start thinking, all right, what is going to be the flow-on effects if this skill suddenly becomes much more popular? So imagine Jung Rowan decides to build around Firestorm. Well, in that case, you might decide that Greater Essences of Fire are likely to go up in value. They're pretty scarce, they're pretty cheap at the time I'm recording this video, but if there isn't an increase in demand for them, then suddenly they can go up quite a bit. Or alternately, a well-rolled, well-corrupted Fireflower Amulet could also be something that goes up in price. What the swing trader does here is they put their money where their hunch is. They then go ahead and start buying up Greater Essences of Fire. They end up buying up Fireflowers with a view to reselling them later when there's more hype after the demand spikes. Something else you might want to consider is second order effects. This is where, for example, one popular streamer streams a strategy that involves focusing on getting as many King in the Mist encounters in a day as possible. Now, if this strategy seems to be working well, a number of players may flip over into it. And when they flip over into it, they're going to be abandoning something else that they were doing. Players that are well built for doing in-map ritual events are probably also pretty good at doing in-map breach events. And as a result, the decision of a number of these players to pivot out of breach and into ritual may result in a decrease of supply of breach stones. At this point, maybe you end up thinking, all right, well, this is going to decrease the supply of breach stones. That's going to push the price up. I'm going to trade into a whole bunch of breach stones at this point. Or maybe you're the person who discovers a particular interaction, and then at that point, what you do is you just go and pick up a whole bunch of copies of the items that are key to it. And once you've done that, you then go and put together a build guide, and then you can put it up either on Path of Exile 2 builds, Mobilytics, or a bunch of other places. And if you were right, and lots of people are interested in copying it, then all those items that you picked up can end up being really expensive suddenly. Of course, a very important caveat here, if the build actually ends up being complete and utter rubbish, and you've hyped it up as being the best thing ever, then in that case, you might find that your credibility takes a hit. And if you do it in a really egregious way, like modifying footage or things like that, you might find yourself on some of those aforementioned scammer blacklists. Probably the two most important things to keep in mind with swing trading. Firstly, you don't really have any expectation of fast turnover of your items. You want to sit on these items for a little while, maybe just overnight, maybe for a few nights. You want to be basically buying things with a view to reselling them quite a bit later. And also, if you're wrong, swing trading can get you burned. Just because you sincerely believe that Greater Essence of Fire is going to end up being the next big thing, you could end up being wrong, and then you're going to find yourself sitting on a whole bunch of stock that might be quite difficult to sell. So keep that in mind. Swing trading is one of the riskiest strategies. Now, there's a couple of terminology points I want to make here that are important. I want to talk about what a buy order is, a sell order is, and in particular, the concept of a blocking order. Blocking orders are something that I learned from my time playing EVE Online, and I think it's probably the single most important concept for anyone that's involved in currency flipping to understand. So an instant match offer, we'll cover this one first. It's where you make a trade offer that someone else has already agreed to. Editing Gog here with a clarification. Where I say agreed to here, I don't mean just that they've said, hey, that sounds like a good idea. What I mean is that they have made a promise that is going to be enforced by the game client that they will accept your offer. Even if they want to back out at this point, they can't. They've already made that promise. And so if you come along and accept, then the transaction happens without them being able to say, oh, you know what, maybe not anymore. For example, someone lists their 3 Greater Essences of the Body for 17 Exalted Orbs, and you accept their offer, immediately receiving your essences. That's an instant match order. A buy order is where you offer to pay in Exalted Orbs, Chaos Orbs, or Divine Orbs, the 3 most common currencies of Path of Exile 2. And if you're in Path of Exile 1, you can remove Exalted Orbs from that list, so you're looking at Chaos Orbs or Divine Orbs there, and it is not an instant match order. So here you can see a real buy order that I listed a while ago. 45 Exalted Orbs is what I'm offering, and I want my counterparty to bring to the table 9 Greater Essences of Ice. If I remember correctly, this order filled overnight. So I listed this and then came back in the morning and I had my 9 Greater Essences of Ice. Of course, it only fills if someone agrees to it, and the person who's agreeing to it, who may provide 1 or may provide as many as 9 of the Greater Essences of Ice, they are going to find that it is an instant match order for them. A sell order is somewhat the opposite. A sell order is something where it is not an instant match order, but instead of you providing one of the 3 super common commodities, or one of the 2 in Path of Exile 1, you are instead offering something more esoteric, and you are requesting one of the super common commodities. Here, in this example, I'm requesting 3 Divine Orbs, and I'm offering 123 Greater Essences of the Body. If I remember correctly, this order never completed filling, and I eventually took it down, took my 2 Divine Orbs and my 41 unsold Greater Essences of the Body, which had then fallen in value against the Divine Orbs so much that I didn't think it was going to fill. And finally, you got a commodity trade, which is where you just swap the main currency items for each other. For example, I give 50 Chaos Orbs, you give 1 Divine Orb. Some of you might be thinking, oh, you could trade esoteric commodity for esoteric commodity. The problem here is no one's likely to ever find your trade offer. You can't commit a trade unless the other person thinks to look for it. And even if you encounter a situation where I've got 2 Greater Essences of the Body, you've got 3 Greater Essences of Ice, we both agree that this would be a fair trade, 2 for 3, neither of us is going to find the other one. And that's the reason that people tend to go through the common currencies instead. So basically, I don't recommend these commodity barter exchanges ever. The most important thing though to keep in mind is the concept of a blocking order. A blocking order is an order that is so large or so poorly priced that you don't expect it to fill promptly at all. And if there are multiple blocking orders, only the most competitive one matters. For example, let's imagine Breachstones are listed at 167 exalts each, but there's only 3 at that price. Then someone's got 272 Breachstones and they're listed at 168. Then there's 13 that are listed at 169, and then there's 2,410 of them at 169.5, and then there's one last one that's listed at 16,733 exalts. In this situation, the 168 exalts, that's the blocking order price, because you don't think that 272 is going to sell through quickly. Even though the 169.5 exalt order for 2,410 breachstones, even though that ends up being an even more blocking order in a way, it's not actually blocking at the moment, because something like 280 or 290 breachstones have got to sell before it even starts to chip away at that 2,410. It might become the blocking order in the future if the existing blocking order clears, but until that point, it's going to just be sitting there unsold. You want to pay close attention to blocking orders that exist, because you want to undercut blocking orders, but it doesn't actually matter whether you undercut other people's orders. Undercutting orders that aren't blocking orders is fine if you just want this commodity gone quickly so that you can reinvest the currency. But if you don't need the currency back quickly, it's fine to go just slightly more competitive than the blocking order there. So what's the first rule of swing trading? I want to cover this quickly because it's the easier of the two topics. This one's very important. What you need to know about swing trading is that you are gambling that your predictions about the game's future are correct. Nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes you're going to be wrong and you're going to lose everything that you put into the swing trade, or maybe not quite everything, but you're going to lose a fair amount of the currency that you put up there. Other times you won't be wrong and you get a lovely surprise. What you need to do if you're getting involved in swing trading, which is risky, is always assume your predictions could be wrong and at least be at peace with the consequences you will face if you are indeed completely and utterly wrong. That's really important to keep in mind. Based on that, I don't recommend putting more than 10% of your league wealth into any particular swing trade, unless it's really, really early in the league, and 10% of your league wealth is something that you can replace in an hour of grinding. Other sorts of tips to keep in mind. The more that you know about the Path of Exile 2 metagame, or Path of Exile 1 for that matter, the more effective you'll be at swing trading, but you'll never be able to remove all of the risk. What you want to do, if you want to get into this in a more serious way, you want to pay attention to a few places. Path of Exile 2 subreddit, Path of Exile build subreddits. But here, you don't want to be paying attention to posts that have been at the top for a day. Instead, you want to be looking at the things that are at the top of rising. If you see someone's put together a build that uses an otherwise pretty unpopular soul core, and they make very good use of that, then it is too late to act by the time that that's got 700 upvotes. But when it's still got 160 upvotes and it's the top or second top of rising, but it's barely on the front page of the subreddit as a whole, in that situation, maybe you've gotten in early enough and you can still pick up those soul cores for resale later. Additionally, you want to pay attention to videos from big name content creators that are under an hour old and to Grinding Gear Games announcements that might shake up the metagame in some way. But in all of these cases, remember that you're making a bet and potentially other players have gotten in before you, but also consider the possibility that someone else is a swing trader that is very, very smart and that got in 30 minutes before you did, not with a view to making currency out of the general player base, but with a view of making currency out of other swing traders. That definitely happens sometimes, and you always want to consider the possibility that maybe you've already been outthought. Okay, so that is the easier of the two topics to cover. Let's talk about arbitrage trading now. How do you choose which items to engage in arbitrage trades on? I cannot provide a list that is forever. You'll need to discover your own items. I made a lot of my wealth in 0.1.0 on flipping Greater Essence of the Body, and there's a few reasons that I feel like this was a good choice. You want to look for arbitrage trading items that meet these criteria. Firstly, they've got to be stackable and thus be listable on the currency exchange. It is just so much more effort to deal with things that aren't stackable and that you have to use the old school trade system for. Secondly, you want items that at least a small number of very wealthy players want a very, very large amount of the commodity. For example, Path of Exile 1, top-end scarabs are perfect here. They're stackable, they're something that at least a small number of wealthy players want in very, very large numbers. Maven's Chisels are another example. These things are rare and they can be quite expensive. They're also just something that is used in enormous amounts. The third criteria is what I term the Regal Orb rule. The game-wide demand needs to exceed the game-wide supply of the item. The reason I call it the Regal Orb rule is after the Regal Orb. The Regal Orb is a legitimately very, very useful crafting item in Path of Exile 1 and 2 alike, but it is something that in a mature trade league, there are simply so many of them going around that no one really needs to trade for more of them. They're able to just simply loot the ones that they want for personal use off the ground. And that means that few people want these things in bulk, and that means they tend to be very, very cheap. The fourth point for selecting an item, you need to be able to afford the item in significant bulk. That's part of the reason I stayed out of the Greater Essence of Torment market, and also there was just a lot more competition in that market. If you're going for things that are more affordable, you can pick up more of them. The fifth criteria is that the number of other people flipping the item is as small as possible. More expensive commodities always attract more flippers. They do potentially end up being better choices in some situations, but you are going to be competing with more people, and that can end up working against you quite badly. But the single most important criteria of all of these ones that we've gone through, the items need to drop in small quantities for a large number of players. This means that for those players, the response is not, oh, okay, I got another one of these. All right, I'm going to have 10 of them pretty soon. Once I've got 10, then I'll get around to selling them. Instead, you want it to be an exciting drop for someone so that they end up thinking, I'm definitely going to sell this because this could be the best drop in the map that I just ran. That's why I like the Greater Essence of the Body. It's stackable. Most players aren't interested in using them, but a small number of players are willing to use an enormous amount of them. And so there is that concentration of demand in a small number of hands. The essence itself is very, very rare, unlike the lesser essence version, which is really common. A player with 2 Divine Orbs can afford a lot of them, at least in the 0.1.0 economy. If you've only got 2 Divine Orbs to your name, you can actually trade for a lot of Greater Essences of the Body, which is something that can definitely get you started. Now in 0.2.0's economy, who knows, maybe that'll be different, but in that case, chances are at least one of the Greater Essences will be pretty cheap. So from trial and error, I also discovered almost no one else was flipping this particular essence. If others did get onto this market, there are about 10 or 20 other different items with similar properties. There's the other essences, there's those omens that modify the behavior of alchemy orbs. They definitely have their uses as well. There are a few different things that I could shift into, but for the time, I didn't need to do that. I stayed with the Greater Essence of the Body. These are the criteria to start arbitrage trading in a particular item. Keep checking to make sure that they continue to apply, because the more people that jump into a market, or the more that just the league metagame evolves, you might find that certain items end up failing the Regal Orb test after a while. There's just so many of them in circulation that no one cares anymore. Or alternately, you might find someone with deeper pockets muscles into your favorite market, and it's best for you to find something else. Now, let's talk about a few particular tips that are important to note. Arbitrage trading is going to require a lot of gold, much more so than other playstyles in Path of Exile 2. For that reason, what you want to do is get out there and map quite a bit. You want to run the highest tier waystones that you can run smoothly. Now, if you do start finding that when you jump up to high tier waystones, you have significant slowdown, then in that case, it is fine to stay lower. For instance, if you can run 10 tier 10 maps in an hour and almost never die, or you could run 4 tier 15 maps slowly and methodically and maybe die once in every 4 of them, in that case, you're probably better off sticking in the tier 10s. But as you power up your character, eventually you get to the point that you can run 8 of the tier 15s, and at that point, that's going to be where you want to be. It's worth remembering that tier 10 and down waystones have considerably easier modifiers on them than tier 11 and up ones. Buy order pricing is next. The most common approach people take is to outbid the current highest offer by the smallest amount possible. Do not recommend this approach. Instead, outbid those blocking orders unless there's only a small price differential between the blocking order and the best priced offer. In that case, yes, do go ahead and outbid the best priced order, but otherwise, just outbid the blocking orders only. That way, anyone that wants to sell a significant amount of the commodity, they're going to clear out all of the higher prices first, and they're going to ensure that other players have to then sell to you. For sell order pricing, it's exactly the reverse. Undercut the blocking orders by the smallest practical amount, but don't worry about non-blocking orders. Now, this strategy of ignoring small orders and undercutting and outbidding only the blocking orders, this is going to decrease your turnover, but in my experience, it increases your margin by enough that it ends up being the better overall option. As you gain experience though, you will learn that these are rules of thumb. And like any rule of thumb, there are times to deviate from it, especially if you believe the market is starting to move in a particular direction. And that's where we're going to talk about one of the most complex topics, which is when you need to combine arbitrage and swing trading at the same time. Sometimes you're identifying reasons that you think a commodity is going to increase in or fall in value. For example, I looked at the patch 0.1.1 and my first thought was this is going to cause the Exalted Orb to crater in value because grinding your games are making it so that more of them drop, not by directly doing so, but by adding more rare monsters to maps. That's going to mean that the Exalted Orb is no longer going to continue to pass the Regal Orb test, and so we're going to see the hitherto unmentioned barrier of 120 Exalted Orbs per the Divine Orb. That's going to fall. We might be in 200 territory, and then as it turned out, it went further than I expected. It got to 300 for a little while, went back to 240, stabilized at 240 for a while, and then just completely exploded. The last time I checked, it was something like 610 Exalted Orbs to one Divine Orb. What you do in this situation is you want to combine swing and arbitrage approaches. As more players notice what's going on, they're either going to buy as a result of a fear of missing out effect, or they're going to sell as a result of a fear of not getting out effect. You want to be ahead of these trends a little bit. Now, the key thing that's going to happen here is there's going to be more turnover in this particular market, and that means wider profit margins, but it can also be a very wild and a very risky ride. If you believe the commodity is going to rise in price, what you want to start doing, no longer just outbid blocking orders. Instead, you want your buy orders to start outbidding a bit more aggressively. You want to have the best price all the time. And when you're listing a sell order, you don't need to undercut by very much at all. In fact, if you think the blocking order is not going to hold, then don't undercut the blocking order. Go higher than the blocking order. Let people clear out the blocking order. Or in the most extreme cases, you can clear out the blocking order yourself, but that is taking quite a big risk. You're buying all of the stock from the blocking order and then relisting it higher. That can definitely backfire. If you believe the commodity is going to fall in price, there's a couple of things you want to do. Firstly, you want to get out of this commodity. You don't want to be holding the ball. You don't want to be sitting on 100 of them, especially if you've got to go to bed overnight. What you want to do at this point is start aggressively undercutting on your sell orders, and either don't outbid much with your buy orders or even stop placing them entirely. So what about those times that you need to log off for an extended period? Maybe you work a 9-to-5 job in an office and for some funny reason, they don't take kindly to you playing Path of Exile 2 on your work PC. So you're going to be away for quite some time. Or maybe you even need to sleep. Well, in that situation, remember that Path of Exile 2's market moves pretty fast. And what you want to do in this situation, if you believe the direction is going up, you don't want to log off for an extended period unless you've already cancelled all your active sell orders, or alternately, at least all your competitive ones. You can put some quite high if you want, and also set a huge competitive buy order if you think the direction is going to be up. If you think the direction is going to be down, instead, you just want to sell all of your stock, aggressively undercut to sell it all, and then cancel any buy orders that you have up. And it's important to note, if you sincerely believe the price is going to crash on something, it is perfectly fine to sell for less than you paid for it because you just want to get out and minimize future losses on this item. So in that situation, it's fine to just say, all right, I'm going to cut my losses. I'm going to list all the items I've got for sale at 3/4 what I paid for them. And then next time I'll buy a smaller number of them. Of course, though, do remember that real life does come first. If it's a choice between being late to pick your kid up from school and making an extra Divine Orb in trade, you definitely want to be the person that's at the school on time and miss out on that Divine Orb. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is looking at how you choose between Exalted Orbs, Chaos Orbs, or Divine Orbs for arbitrage trades. But this one's going to be an interesting one because you're going to want to get into the mindset of your trade counterparty as best as you can. So with gold costs, let's firstly get through the gold cost aspect. Again, this is only for Path of Exile 2 here. Path of Exile 1 has different numbers. When you place a sell order or a commodity trade, or for that matter, an instantaneous order, you'll be charged a gold fee based upon the currency you are requesting. This fee is not refunded if you cancel the order, although in certain circumstances, the game will automatically cancel the order for you. And if that happens, you will receive a pro rata gold refund if that comes up. That's a pretty rare thing, and it only comes up if you put up orders that are in fractional amounts of currency. This fee is 120 gold per Exalt you request, 160 per Chaos, and 800 gold per Divine. The same principle applies to buy orders, but other commodities just have really varied prices. It costs 1,000 gold to request an Orb of Chance, 1 gold to request a Scroll of Wisdom, and there's fixed fees for each essence, each catalyst, each distilled emotion, and so on and so forth. Soon before patch 0.2.0, the Exalted Orb value completely collapsed. I mentioned that it got up to 610, but at the time I wrote this article for Mobalytics, one Divine Orb was worth 50 Chaos Orbs, and this was worth 550 Exalted Orbs. In this context, you can see that if you request Exalted Orbs, you're going to need to spend 66,000 gold for every Divine Orb that you get in turnover. If you're making a relatively high margin, let's say you buy at 2/3 of your sell price, you're only making one Divine Orb per 200,000 gold or so. And if your margin's lower than that, let's say that you're buying at 9/10 of your sell price, then it's going to be 2/3 of a million gold in order to make one Divine in profits. This is the reason that many traders started abandoning the Exalted Orb and started preferring small trades to be in Chaos Orbs rather than Exalts. But the final tip that I've got here for arbitrage is to think about the story behind the other party to your trade. When you post a buy order for a commodity, try to profile the reasons other people who are trading with you might be selling to you. For example, say that you post an order for a Greater Essence of Torment. Prior to 0.2.0, this is often the most expensive of the essences. Anyone that's at endgame can find this, but most players that are selling them will only have one or two of them. But there's a category of players for whom this is the most exciting drop they've had so far. These players are new to endgame, and this is their first real windfall drop because they've just happened to get it before they've got a perfect Jeweler's Orb, before they've got a Divine Orb, or anything like that. What does that new to endgame player want? Well, they don't have enough to trade for a Divine Orb. At least at the time I was researching this video, Greater Essences of Torment was something like 1/5 of a Divine Orb. So, they don't have enough to trade for a Divine Orb, they probably want Exalted Orbs, both for trading and also to apply to their own items, both the ones that got currently equipped and potentially future ones as well. Chaos Orbs are great, but they're not that intrinsically useful to this newer player. And based on this profile that I've made of someone that's happened to loot a Greater Essence of Torment, I would typically list my buy order in Exalted Orbs for this commodity. As a bit of a counterpoint though, consider a commodity like a Breachstone or an Audience with the King. Someone that's completing content in high enough tier maps in order to get one of these commodities at all, they are probably going to want Divine Orbs and Chaos Orbs and be less concerned about Exalted Orbs. So I'd be inclined to post my buy orders for those commodities in those currencies instead. But it's definitely fine to experiment with other currencies. You just want to be thinking about the stories that are behind the sellers. Likewise, you want to be thinking about the stories behind the buyers as well. Imagine you're a wealthy crafter. You're mass producing lightning spell wands, and you might spend so much on wand bases that the amount that they spend on Greater Essences is just a rounding error. In this situation, they're going to be selling their crafted items in Divine Orbs. So their income is going to be overwhelmingly Divine Orbs. Let's say that they've sold 5 wands today for 50 Divine Orbs each, another 30 that weren't quite as good for 10 Divine Orbs each, and then a few that disappointed them, they've listed for 20 Chaos through to 3 Divines. Well, you can see how this player, most of the wealth they're getting in is in raw Divines. As a result, they're going to be looking to purchase their Greater Essences of Torment using Divine Orbs because that's what they have. They're probably not going to be interested in transacting in Chaos Orbs, even if doing so will save them a few percent. So to this person, you want to be selling them in Divine Orbs instead. Now you could potentially sell to someone else, that would be perfectly reasonable, but likely the wealthy crafter is going to outbid them because they can afford to, and to that person, time is money. So in short, if you're placing a buy order where what you're requesting from the other party to the trade is less than 1 Divine Orb per item, in that case, you probably want to place your orders in Exalted Orbs or Chaos Orbs, and base which one based upon who you think is likely to be supplying you. That way you're able to purchase from people who only have one of the item. You can set one buy order in Exalts and another one in Chaos if you want. Doing so is going to tie up 2 of your slots, so that's going to be a little bit disruptive to your limits, but it can still be very worth your while. You've just got to have the spare order slots, and you need to not be concerned about the risk of both orders filling, because you can't set up an order that says, I want to buy Greater Essences of Ice for 2 Chaos Orbs, and another one that says, I want to buy the same essence for 21 Exalted Orbs, but whichever one of these orders fills first, cancel the other one. No, you're going to end up with both of them filling sometimes. Default to selling a large bulk of crafting commodities though in Divine Orbs. It's almost always the right way. Anyways, that's my tips and tricks for currency flipping, both in Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2, subject of course to the caveat that some of the gold costs are going to be different in Path of Exile 1. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away down below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. The Mobalytics link will be down in the description as well if you want to check that out. May your Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.